You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. This episode is super exciting because this is our 1-year anniversary of the podcast. I cannot believe it. Last October, we started School Counseling Simplified, and wow, it has grown so much, and we've received so much love from you guys, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your love and support. Thank you for listening and for sharing with your friends. This episode is going to look a little different. Instead of doing a new episode, I decided to compile some of our favorites, so this is the best of the School Counseling Simplified podcast. Enjoy!
So I know it's October, and you may already have your caseload, you may already be knee-deep in everything, or you may be like a lot of counselors I know, and you're like, who am I supposed to be seeing? What's going on? This is kind of stressful. So our stressor for the day is, who the heck am I supposed to be seeing? What am I supposed to be doing? And you'll hear me talk a lot about advocating for your role and for your position. So I know that there are parents, there are students, there are even fellow teachers, and hopefully not, but sometimes even admin who don't know your role. The role of the school counselor has evolved over time, from like we're still getting called guidance counselors sometimes. People don't really know what our job is, and that's a problem. So I'm always trying to advocate for my position by explaining clearly what my job is, by making myself the need for my position be known, by making myself an indispensable resource for students. So that's something I'll talk a lot about in our episodes. So in this first one, you don't want people to think, what does that girl do again? So I'm going to help you know how to form your caseload at the beginning of the year in a proactive way. So this way, you can know what you're supposed to be doing. You can communicate that to others, and you can see the max students possible that you need to see. So the number one way that we get our caseload is through referrals. So you're likely having a referral-based system. That means that parents are referring students to you. Teachers or admin are referring students to you. Maybe your students are self-referring themselves to you. You're going to receive these referrals. Oh, for example, James needs help with anger management skills. Or maybe a student says, hey, my parents are getting a divorce. I want to talk about it. That's what I mean when I say a referral-based system. So typically I have paper referral forms, and I also have a Google form now, which is great for if you're doing virtual learning, but also even if you're in the classroom, or if you're in your school site, the virtual form is just a paperless way, save some trees, and just Google Forms makes everything so much easier, y'all. I'll continue to talk about Google Forms and Google Sheets. I really love using all of the Google tools, so you will hear me talk about those a lot. But anyways, the Google Forms are a great way to track. You can put one on your counseling website, and parents or teachers can fill it out, and then you'll, get an email that you have some responses, and you'll see there that someone needs your services. So that's what I mean when I say a referral-based program. So hopefully you're already doing that. If not, you should start to do that. So get some referral forms. I have a free paper referral form and a free digital Google form, and it's editable. And that is in my free resource library. So if you go to my website, brightfutures-counseling.com, we also have links on all the socials and in the show notes. But if you go to my website, I have a tab that says Free Resource Library. And in there, I have a lot of free resources for you. So if you sign up, you get all the free resources, and I'm continually adding resources there. And I will be adding the Google form and the paper version of the referral form. So if you're not doing referrals already, or if you want to tweak your forms, head over there to the Free Resource Library and be sure to grab yours. Okay, so referral-based system is a great way to form your caseload. But like I said, you don't want to be just lounging on your beanbag in your calm down corner and everyone thinking, what does she do again? While you're waiting on these referrals to trickle in, right? Because at the beginning of the year, things are usually pretty smooth, hopefully. You want to create a proactive and preventative comprehensive school counseling program. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. You want to create a proactive and preventative comprehensive school counseling program. So what that means is, in addition to collecting these parent, teacher, and student referrals, I want you to do 4 methods to form your caseload. This will ensure that no students slip through the cracks. So the number 1 method is to meet with your admin. So meet with your principal or your administrator or whoever you report to and find out which students should be on your radar. So this is especially important if you're new to your school site. And it's a good way to touch base, even if you're a returning counselor. So I want you to meet with them, ask them for a meeting, have some time, and talk about their concerns. They likely know things that you don't know. They may know of some family changes that have happened, or they might have more background information on a newly enrolled student. So by meeting with them, take some notes and find out which kids, kind of get a pulse on which kids should be on your radar. Put these in a list. Then the second thing you can do is email teachers and ask them directly. So if you have a list from your admin meeting, I want you to email the teachers or talk to them in person if you can, and say, hey, these students are kind of on my radar. Just give me a heads up if you see something. And you can even say the topic, but remember, you want to keep the majority of the information confidential. But you could say like, hey, Jennifer, could potentially have some friendship issues this year. I just want you to keep an eye out for her. If you see that she's having any friendship issues or if you have any concerns, please let me know. Okay? So if the teacher didn't know this, she might think, oh, it's no big deal. But now that she kind of knows, oh, this could be something deeper, this could be something else, she'll let you know Jennifer's not going to slip through the cracks. And again, like I said, unfortunately, sometimes teachers aren't quite clear on what your role is, or they might think, oh, that's the counselor, she does this. They don't know that you're there to help support their students directly. You are an awesome resource for them. Teachers know their kids the best, right? They're seeing these kids day in and day out, and they know what their kids need, and they will be relieved when they find out that you could offer this support to them. So definitely communicate with the teachers. Okay, so, you learn so much within 1 year. Even if you've been counseling 20 years, I'm sure you're still constantly learning and growing, right? As we should be. We are lifelong learners, and we're constantly trying to tweak our craft. But there are a few things that would have saved me a lot of headache and stress in the beginning, and I want to share them with you in case you are experiencing these same pain points and struggles. Okay, number 1, you don't have to check your emails after hours. What? This is a shocker, right? You've heard me say it. Please don't check your emails after hours. Those nights and weekends are for you and your family and your personal time, or I don't care what you do on them, but it's not check your work email, right? So I used to do this. I used to have it on my phone, which I'm still not anti having your work email on your phone as long as you can set some boundaries around checking it and definitely disable notifications. But I want to share a story with you where having my work email on my phone and checking it after hours was not a good situation. So this is actually before my school counseling job, but when I was doing, the academic and counseling specialist position at an educational consulting company, and we worked really closely with these families, and we're having, weekly, sometimes even daily communication with the parents. And I had a parent of a student who was just kind of difficult to work with. Anyways, you maybe have experienced some parents like that. And she sent me a really nasty email, after hours. And then I checked it. I was laying in bed about to go to bed. So it's 10 p.m. And I checked it and I read it on my phone. And then I started crying, and it was this whole thing. And I felt really stressed. And I was all, do I reply? When do I reply? And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Here's the thing. I was going to get that email the next morning anyways when I arrived to work, and I had to deal with it, right? I had to, respond to her concerns and fix the situation. But checking it at nighttime did me no good. It actually got me less sleep, more stress, and my poor husband had to listen to this whole situation and how stressed I was about it. And those feelings make you feel burnt out over time. The more and more that you have these things, it's you can never turn off, right? By not setting a direct stop time to stop checking your email, it's constantly buzzing in the background, and you have these conversations and unfinished business going on in your head, and you can't truly unwind and separate your work from your personal life. And this is something that's especially a problem if you're working from home this year. If you're working virtually and doing virtual counseling, then it's even harder and more difficult to draw that boundary. But remember, boundaries prevent burnout. It is very important that you establish clear professional boundaries to avoid burnout. Having those situations come up where you're feeling all stressed and frazzled on nights or on the weekends, over time, those will lead to burnout. And when you are burnout, you cannot deliver your best self and serve your students. You know, they always say you can't pour from an empty cup. And so if you're burnout, your cup is empty. So to refill that cup, we need to set some boundaries. That's something I really wish I knew early on. So grief is definitely not the most fun topic to talk about, but it is very relevant. I know many of your students are experiencing it, and especially in our society today with the pandemic, I know many of you are looking for grief resources more than ever. So I definitely want to address it here over the next couple of weeks. So today I want to talk to you about how you can counsel students through grief at the Tier 1 class intervention level. So these are those class SEL or class guidance lessons that you're doing. And there's 2 cases where you would be doing a lesson like this. So the first case, this is the one I'm going to talk about today and that I'm encouraging you to do, is a preventative piece. So that's where you're going to go into classrooms and teach about grief. This way the students are familiar with the terms, they know what it is, and they can identify how to deal with it in advance. So when something does occur, they feel prepared. The second way it would be an active response, and that is if something has happened at your school. So maybe a student or a staff member has passed away, and then you're going into lessons. Going into classrooms doing these lessons. So those are a little different. That's the active response. But today I want to talk to you about the preventative response. So this is a lesson that you can do ahead of time to kind of equip students with the skills that they need. So that way, if and when something does occur, they feel prepared. And then you go in and do that active response lesson, but they already have a basis. You're not going in and saying, let's define grief right in the midst of it, if that makes sense. So let me tell you a few tips for doing these preventative grief lessons. So the first thing I want you to do is educate students about what grief is. So you need to define grief. Many students, especially our younger ones, probably don't know what this means. So you can discuss what it means to grieve something. You can discuss how you can grieve death or loss or separation. It doesn't always have to be directly death. It could be like incarceration or divorce or anything, but primarily focusing on death and loss. And then after you define it, you can answer any questions students may have about exactly what grief means. Then you want to talk about how it manifests itself in different ways. So you want to talk to students about how sad is not the only emotion that is linked with grief. Oftentimes it is anger, or it is fear, or it is frustration, or maybe sometimes it's silliness. Primarily fear and anger are big ones that go hand in hand with sadness. And many times students just automatically think grief, death equals sad. So we want to clarify that grief manifests itself in different ways. There is no wrong way to feel. There are no bad emotions. And you want to normalize this experience because a student listening in the classroom may have experienced loss already, and they may be able to relate and say, oh, it was okay for me to feel that way. So you want to definitely normalize those feelings and let them know that there are no bad emotions. So after you do that, you want to say that healing is not linear. So you can use a visual to show, oftentimes we think of something like an arrow going up. If you're looking at a graph, like over time, things are improving, but that's not the case with grief. You want to explain to them that it is like a roller coaster. So that's a great analogy to use with the little guys, how there are many ups and downs and how you're not necessarily getting better or feeling better each day and each month. But instead, some days are great and some days are really hard. And you might just wake up feeling like you're going to have a really hard day, or maybe something makes you think about your loss and that triggers it. Either way, you want to let them know that there is no direct path to healing and that it is a process, not a clear progress. Okay. So we want to, number one, educate them on what grief is. Number 2, discuss the emotions associated with grief and how they manifest in different ways, and that is okay. And then you want to talk about how healing is not a straight path, but rather a roller coaster.
I have 4 examples of activities that you can do with individual students. So the first one is a journal. So you may think that sounds boring, but it can be really cool in an individual setting. So I did this recently with a student who was processing grief, and she didn't really want to talk about it so much as write about it. So there are certain topics that maybe students feel more confident writing about. So perhaps, grief, or if they're parents are going through a divorce, or if it's something, trauma related that's hard for them to verbalize, have them write. You can give them, this is like a homework option where they would write outside of the session, and then you can read it together or discuss it during the session, or they can take some time to write during the session. You could turn some music on, kind of make it a calming experience, and then you can kind of discuss and debrief it after. Or maybe they're not ready to share it right then, but you kind of save it for later. But journaling is a really great way for students to process strong emotions and to work through things. Now, the second option is a workbook. So kind of similar to a journal, but this is a little more light. So this would be for students who are learning a new skill. So perhaps they're learning self-regulation strategies. You could use, I have a coping strategies journal that I love to use. I'll link to it in the show notes. But you could have the entire workbook out, and then students can, it has different things like coloring pages, mandalas, fill in the blank things, different things where they circle strategies. So just break it up, do a couple pages at a time out of a workbook. And that, that's an easy way to plan out your sessions. If you find a workbook that really aligns to what you're doing and what your goal is for that student, then you can, just break it up. If the workbook is 20 pages, divide it by your 5 sessions, do 4 pages at a time. Look at that math I just did on the spot. But something like that. That's a good way to use a workbook. Now, I mentioned breaking up and planning your sessions. In an earlier episode, I was talking about how you want to set a goal for your student. So you want each student to have a goal. So perhaps the goal is you want them to be able to learn coping strategies when they're feeling angry or in the red zone. If that's your goal, you then want to have an objective for each session. So session 1, they first need to know what the red zone is before they can identify coping strategies. So maybe in the first session, you're just identifying zones of regulation, doing an introduction. Maybe in the second session, you're talking about triggers. Maybe in the third session, you're talking about coping strategies, and so on and so forth. So identify a goal, a long-term or, end of the session set goal, and then break it up into different objectives for each session. And I encourage you to write those down. You can even align them to the Ask Mindsets and Behaviors. This way you kind of have a clear plan and vision of what to do. Then when you're going to pick out your activities, you're just kind of filling in the blanks. So that's a more manageable way to plan individual counseling sessions rather than just sitting down and thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do with this kid today? So that's how you can use a workbook. Then you could do a book club. So this is kind of fun. If you find, similarly to finding a workbook that aligns with your counseling topic, if you find an actual book, so maybe this is like a short story or a novel, depending on the age of the kid, it could be a picture book, whatever. But you can find the book, they read a couple pages independently before the session, kind of as homework, or you do it together in the session, and then you discuss it. So you could, have some writing prompts or discussion questions ready to discuss the book, and then they can make applications to their everyday life. So I love that example. And then finally, the fourth thing is using group activities. So perhaps I'm all about repurposing content because, like I mentioned, I know it's hard to find time to plan. But if you have like a board game or discussion cards from a group, that's totally something you can do if it's on the same topic. But there is, I want you to be mindful about sharing because, for example, if you're doing discussion cards, you don't just want them like draw an answer, draw an answer, draw an answer. You want to take turns drawing, make it like alternating, but then that has you answering the questions. So you don't want to overshare. This isn't about you and you don't want to bring attention to you, but you do want to be an example and kind of model how they can use the cards. Same thing with a board game. If you play with the student, then when you land on a space, you have to answer. I remember leading a middle school girls group on body image,
and we were doing the discussion cards, and they asked me, they're like, well, what's your least favorite body part or something? And I was like, oh, I was not expecting to talk about this in front of you girls today, but I had to model it. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. So those are 4 possible activities you could do: a journal, a workbook, a book club, or group activities such as a board game or a discussion cards. And you want to modify those based on your students' preferences, interests, and learning styles. The more engaging it can be, the more effective it will be. And when you're planning out this, you want to keep that end goal in mind and then break up each week into an objective. And if you can align it with, the ask of mindsets and behaviors, then that's even better, because an aligned session will allow you to show parents and teachers, that you have a plan. You're not just like willy-nilly meeting and chatting about things, that you have a clear plan and vision for their student or child's success. So you may have 3 questions going into your first year. First, well, what should my office look like? Second, what do I actually need to counsel students? And third, what do I need to buy? So first, try to find out what your actual office space will be. Will it be shared like mine? Will you have a window? I was so anxious to have a window and finally got one in that Costa Rica office. Are you in a repurposed custodial closet? These are all valid questions. Your office may not look like much, but you can make it a cozy, welcoming space for students with a few nice touches. So let's talk about some areas that you don't want to forget. First, a calm down corner. So a calm down corner is a safe space where kids can come to when they need help managing strong emotions. So this is where you can include some fidget toys or sensory boxes. Maybe you have nice pillows or seating, a cozy rug, some coping strategies toolboxes or feelings posters. Then you'll have a bulletin board space. So if you don't have a bulletin board to decorate, no worries. You can hang up a piece of butcher paper and then decorate that. That's what I always did. Or you may have some posters that you want to hang up, or a whiteboard space where you can write messages and keep track of activities. Then you have your desk. So you can organize it as you like. I personally like to keep a file cabinet by my desk so I can have a file folder with each student's info easily accessible. Then your small group space. So I love to lead small groups at a round table or a kidney-shaped table. This way all students feel equal, and it's a great way to facilitate conversations. So hopefully you'll have a table and a few chairs to conduct small groups at. And then finally, the talking space. So I love having couches. So this is more for those individual sessions or older students. Couches create more of a comfortable, almost therapist office vibe rather than a sterile classroom. And I also love having adult-sized seating options for parent meetings. Now, what about actually counseling students? What do I need? Well, you'll need curriculum and activities, books, videos, and games. So regarding curriculum and activities, you can use published curriculum like Second Step or Zones of Regulation, like I mentioned. You can buy curriculum online. So Teachers Pay Teachers and myself at Bright Futures Counseling have a lot of options for curriculum you can buy. Or you can create your own curriculum using lessons and activities. So maybe you've already started to do this in grad school, so looking into Pinterest and other online resources to piecemeal together your own curriculum. Now, books. Reading a book as part of a class lesson or with a small group is a great starting point to discussions. Now, books can get pricey, so start with a few essentials that you can use for multiple purposes. And then also check with your librarian to see which SEL books are already on campus. Maybe you could borrow from the library or from teachers. And for videos. Like books, I love to use a video to start discussions with students. And the best thing is, they're free typically. So go to YouTube and you can sort by category and find lots of great videos that you can use in your class lessons. And finally, games. So Jenga, a deck of playing cards, some dice, and puzzles are my go-to games. So you can customize the Jenga to use it as an icebreaker, use the playing cards and dice during discussion games, and I like to do puzzles with individual students as a way to build rapport. So you can always do homemade games too if you don't want to purchase these, such as charades, Simon Says, or other role play activities. And what do I actually need to buy? Well, don't stress, I have 4 don'ts of buying.
So first, don't buy everything. It's exciting once you start thinking about all of the possibilities for your new office, but don't go overboard on spending. Number 2, don't reinvent the wheel. So meet with your principal and find out what materials are available to you. Try to reach out to the previous counselor as well to see which programs they successfully implemented. You'll have plenty of opportunities to create new activities, so take the existing curriculum where you can get it. 3, don't be afraid to ask for funds. See if there is a school counseling or character education budget. Sometimes the Parent-Teacher Association has additional funds for these programs. I worked at a school that had a Teachers Pay Teachers account so we could order from. And almost every school has some type of budget for office supplies. So even if you can't get any curriculum, you can try to get markers, pencils, clipboards, etc. to use with your students. So you'll never know unless you ask. And my final don't for you, don't underestimate the power of DIY. You saw my lamp from 2015 back there. Once you determine what you're starting off with, you can buy supplemental materials like books, small group curriculum, and digital activities. But my first year, almost everything I did was DIY. So don't compare yourself to other people's offices or Pinterest perfection. This is such an exciting time, but it can be easy to get caught up in the details. But remember, at the end of the day, change happens as a result of connecting with the kids. I hope you enjoyed those episode flashbacks. Maybe you caught them the first time around and this was a fun re-listen where you got to get some more ideas or put them into action. Or maybe this was your first time hearing them. Either way, I hope you love this episode and I want to thank you again for listening to the podcast. And we are doing an awesome 1-year anniversary giveaway. Head over to my Instagram at Bright Futures Counseling to get all the details. But spoiler alert, we will be giving away a fun podcasting themed gift. So I don't want you to miss out on this. And I hope to see you there. Head over to Bright Futures Counseling on Instagram to get all the deets. Talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.